want to introduce the person who's going to hold this session for us today, and someone who's got really, really good experience over the last year or two, maybe even longer, at doing a version of a climate emergency centre. I'll let Ben to immediately kind of get that title out the way, as much or as little as he wants to. But Ben McCallan, just to introduce him, is chair of Zero Guildford, the charity which operates Zero Climate Hub in the town centre of Guildford. Zero is focused on education and engagement of the wider community on issues regarding climate breakdown, environmental degradation, and provides practical solutions for residents, businesses, schools, churches, and more to improve their sustainability and cut their emissions. And he's bringing some friends along later in the session too. So without further ado, over to you, Ben.
Cheers, Rich. Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks very much for coming. So I'm going to chat through today a bit about how we got Zero off the ground, and hopefully help some of you guys that are looking to do something similar. What I would say, obviously, is this is all entirely from the personal experience we've had as setting this place up. That's quite important to get out of the way. First of all, it might not be the right way for you guys to do stuff in your own community, and I think probably the most important thing that we can say to people when we chat to people who come and visit or we Zoom with to give advice to is that we've done this one way, but you know it's entirely down to the needs of your community and what's going to get the most buy-in as to how you sort of take this forward if you do try and get something similar off the ground. So I'm going to chat a little bit about generally what this sort of project entails, what we're doing specifically on it, the impact that we've seen so far. We've been open nearly 6 months now, opened in November. So yeah, coming up for 6 months, and the impact that we've seen so far. And then I've got somebody coming from our local BID, the Business Improvement District, which is sort of like, look, they basically charge a bid levy and then try and make things better for businesses across the town. So that she's going to come and be chatting about what this sort of project can bring to high streets and town centres, given that I think one thing that we definitely all see across the country is quite a lot of empty spaces at the moment. And then a bit later on, I've got a chap called Prashant Kumar coming up who heads up the air pollution research lab at the University of Surrey, which is based in Guildford. And then we'll have Q&A at the end. So if you've got questions, pop them in the chat. Rich will take them out the chat, and then we can go through some of them at the end. And hopefully that'll be a good place to have a bit more interactive discussion and help answer some specific queries. So Dan, could you start the slides for me, please? Dan's going to scroll through the slides for me as I go so that I can read my notes as I go. So first of all, as Rich mentioned, the name. So obviously it's called How to Set Up a Climate Emergency Centre, this talk. We don't actually call ourselves a climate emergency centre. We don't really call ourselves a climate hub either. It's a bit of a tricky one, sort of knowing how to name the project, really. Reason we don't call ourselves a climate emergency centre is we did a bit of polling when we first did some public consultation on this, and the name didn't resonate amazingly well with a lot of people. Either they weren't quite sure whether it was like a place you go when an actual emergency is happening as a sort of like emergency shelter sort of thing, and some people felt it was a bit too doom and gloom. And obviously there's quite a mixed sort of feeling in how we communicate climate messaging to actually make it resonate with people. So we spent probably the longest thing we've done actually was trying to decide what the name of this place was called. And the charity we already had called Zero Guildford, and we settled on calling this space Zero, which at the time, obviously, it was one of the words of the first word of the charity. So it doesn't seem like it should have taken several months to decide on that. But yeah, we were pretty happy with the name. It turns out it's extremely confusing to people, so nobody ever gets the name right. They either call us Carbon Zero or Carbon Guildford. Somebody called us Guildford Nets the other day, I think, which is quite a misrepresentation of what we're doing here. So yeah, I think the name is quite important in when you guys are deciding what you're going to do. But again, there's no real right or wrong decision on how you do that. So you might see projects like this called climate emergency centres, climate hubs, climate centres. It really sort of depends what the community working on it decides to go for. Can you do the slide for me, please, Dan? So the question, what is a climate hub? Again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It depends what needs you're trying to solve locally. So there is some common factors that you see right across the projects that are springing up across the UK. And I think there's probably now about 15 existing projects in the UK, with about another 10 to 15 in the works. And I think some people, I can see Julian from Swindon here, from Swindon Hub, I take it. And there's some various other places. Plymouth's just got hold of a Waterstones on the High Street. In Surrey, we've got Elmbridge Eco Hub and Talking Tree and Staines, as well as Zero. And then down on the south coast, they've got Lewis. And then there's a couple of other pop-up spaces being used around the country. There's one in Dorking or Leatherhead. There's Islington, which uses it as a pop-up. And I see Suzanne from Wandsworth just joined. They have just opened up in the shopping centre there as well. So there's quite a few projects springing up, which is great, because obviously what we're trying to do here is look at different ways to model how we move forward with different ideas for living and working that can actually work to reduce our impact. So the more different areas are trying this, the better in terms of finding solutions that work. So some of the things that do seem to be a common theme across these projects is that they're all pretty much community led. And that's important, obviously, because a lot of the reason these projects have sprung up is the frustration with national government or local authorities and how slow they're moving to respond to the climate and environmental crisis that we face. Largely, they're focused on education and engagement, and there's some really obvious reasons for that. Is that having a visible and physical space somewhere can really help ramp up engagement through bringing footfall into a building where you can engage people on some of these topics. One thing I think that is a really important part, which seems to unite a lot of these projects, is that they seem to be largely solution focused. And I think that's sort of something that's sprung up over the last couple of years, is that, you know, a lot of noise was being made about the issues that we face, and a lot of people were feeling like we've sort of raised the alarm on this, but where do we go now? And it's all well and good constantly shouting about the problem, but if you're not offering either a story or a solution to people, then it becomes quite tricky to properly engage people who maybe aren't aware of some of the issues in how to move forward. And also the thing that should align through all these projects across the UK is that they need, as I say, to be designed for the needs of that specific community. So it's no real use copying a model particularly anywhere else, because you really need to be consulting on what the issues are locally, be that food insecurity, really bad air quality, and to try and focus around some of that, not just so that you can actually tackle those issues, but it's by far the best way to generate buy-in to the project locally. And then another thing that runs through it is collaboration and co-design. So it's quite a lot of work, I won't lie, getting one of these spaces off the ground, and then especially maintaining it. So you really need to bring in as many stakeholders as possible, and look at how you can co-design those solutions for moving forward, and ideally try and look at building a community-led climate action plan as the result to come out of this. Slide, please, Dan. So I want to chat about some of the benefits here as well, and then I'm going to chat about move on to what we actually how you can use different models for this and what we did. So there's obvious benefits. I've touched on a couple of them of the space, which are as I say, pretty obvious. The footfall is one. Having a physical space, especially in the town centre, means that you're going to engage a lot of people who might be walking past that otherwise wouldn't come to your meetings or get involved with your group if you are, meeting once a week on a Thursday or what have you. It massively opens up your visibility, not just of your own group and the groups involved, but to actually a lot of the problems that you face either as a community or nationally or globally. But on top of that, there's some sort of really good, solid hidden reasons for doing a lot of this. And I put 4 of them down the side there. There's more, and it will depend on what you're bringing to your own local area. But for me, some of the main benefits that we've seen out of this focus on the communications and messaging. And I touched on the difficulty of climate communication. There's some great work coming out of climate outreach. If anybody's joined any of those webinars recently, they've done a ton of research into what is actually connecting. And so this sort of space is a really good way to start exploring some of this and to developing methods of the communication that actually resonate and can be tailored to the demographics of your own community. So obviously we're in the southeast here. We probably have a very different demographic to people either in other parts of the UK, be it Scotland, Wales, or if you're in, from the southeast to the northwest or what have you. You need to be tailoring those messages to be looking at the problems that you're going to be facing in a bit of an uncertain future. And by setting up the space and putting projects in there that can focus on that, a lot of them can just be like really common sense, and you can really get some messaging out there around projects that just, you know, everybody thinks are a good idea. So behind me here, you can see the community, well, maybe you can't see it, but community fridge that we've got set up here. Waste is one of the things that turns out to be uniting right across demographics, right across the political spectrum. Everybody hates waste, and food waste is about 8 to 10% of man-made greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a really good example of a way that you can open a conversation without really having to say words climate or adaptation or any of that. You can start the conversation around something that everybody just thinks is a good idea and is a uniting message to say, look, it's to cut waste. But then you can open on the reasons why. Once you've got that conversation rolling and people are engaged in it, you can then start digging a little bit deeper. So it means that you're not sort of coming up against a barrier immediately with certain terminology or people's sort of ingrained mindsets. When you start talking about the actual root cause of it, you can start talking about the solution and then get into the causes. So we find that helps a lot in how we engage people. Second big reason is obviously community cohesion. And when you look at how people respond to this, they seem to, everybody cares about their community, don't they? Their neighborhood, especially in a hyper local sense, but their own neighbors, the place they live, their green spaces. Everybody cares a lot more about that than they might do, you know, about the country as a whole. And so looking at some of these local issues is a much better way, we find, to actually build cohesion around that and to help start driving forward some of the solutions to the problems you face. So been a massive boost in that. And also about starting to open the conversations around resilience and adaptation. Again, having the projects in the space can really help this. So we have one of the things, actually, as a load of volunteers just across from me at the moment, sorting out baby clothes. So one of the projects we host here is a baby clothes library, which was set up by a local resident, and people, they pay a £20 deposit for a box. They get a box of clothes, 48-litre box of clothes, which lasts them 3 to 6 months, and then they upgrade it. They can take their deposit back, or they can upgrade it and not pay another deposit. And then at the end, when the kid is older than whatever the top range they have, they can either take their £20 back, or most people just leave it as a donation to the baby clothes library. So we've got volunteers here sorting that now. But again, it's just a great idea. Everyone with kids knows what it's like to be constantly upgrading clothes. So it's a good idea, but it's also a great way to start talking about, well, what happens when supply chains collapse? What happens when we can't feed and clothe ourselves? So approaching it from that solution first communication strategy is a really good way to talk about resilience building and creating adaptational strategies. And then lastly, obviously, it takes a lot of effort, as I say, to get one of these places off the ground. I won't sugarcoat that. But there's a lot of good research at the moment coming out showing that actually the people who are doing the most about tackling the climate crisis are the ones who feel most positive about us averting the worst. And I know it doesn't always seem like that. A lot of us obviously can look at the news and get pretty downbeat about it, but it seems to be a bit of a trend. And so it's a bit like doing something actually makes you feel better about it, not just from the warm glow perspective, but it actually seems like that action breeds positivity. And then there's a really interesting thing to explore there, I think, in the flip scenario of that, of how positivity can breed action. So people seeing stuff happening makes them feel a bit better about our chances of getting out of the situation we're in, or at least averting the worst of it. I don't think any of us think we're probably going to get out of it, but averting the worst and then taking those steps that can draw them into it. So there's a lot going on in here at the moment. Hopefully it's not too noisy in there, but we've had Lego Rebellion hosted here for the last 5 months. I can talk about what that is later, because on Wednesday that seemed to be the most popular question that came out of the talk: what is Lego Rebellion? But we've got the guy who created it packing it down right now. We've just had a wellbeing session finished. Wellbeing is a really important part of what we're doing here, because we're trying to help people address some of the negative emotions associated with climate breakdown, help them process those emotions and spur themselves into action. We got people sorting baby clothes. We just had 20 students from one of the local schools come in. So it's a bit of a hive of activity this morning for Friday. Upstairs, we've got a load of artists setting up. We got our first climate and nature themed exhibition today. So there's a lot of different things that can happen in this space, which can find different ways to connect with different demographics, different parts of the political spectrum, and put a lot of that, as I say, solution focus first. Slide, please, Dan. Thank you. So I'm going to chat a little bit about the models that you can do to get this off the ground, and this could last like all day, so we can chat about this a little bit more in depth, but I'm going to just touch on this. We've got quite a long blog on our website which you can read for more information, and you're welcome to put any questions in there. You're also welcome to email questions, or come and chat for advice or what have you, and we can chat through some of this. So the easiest way to get one of these off the ground is to do it as a pop-up. And you can see there, that's Islington Climate Centre. That is in the Angel Centre, just off Islington High Street. They're working on a pop-up basis. So I happened to be in Islington the day that they launched, which was great. So I got to pop in and support them a bit, because they'd two of them had been in here. So we went and saw the launch. It's a great little space. It's an old GBK in a lovely, really nice shopping centre they've got there. And they are doing it on the basis of they got this space for 5 different pop-ups to start with. But there's a lot of empty space in the shopping centre, so it's pretty likely they'll probably carry on now, I think. Dorking Climate Emergency did the same thing. They had a constant 2-month pop-up in a community centre in Leatherhead. So that's the easiest way to do it. And obviously what we've got here, we're open 7 days a week, 10 till 4. But if you're looking to start something off the ground, get something off the ground, then having a pop-up can be a really good way to help build support, because you need a lot of people to keep one of these projects running the whole time. And we're quite conscious to say that when people come and chat to us, we are in Guildford. We do have 2 areas in the top decile of food poverty and 2 in the 4th decile. But typically it's a fairly wealthy part of the country. It means people have more free time and more resources to put into it. So not every area might be able to sort of aim for how long we've managed to keep this open. So it's important to recognise what the situation is with your community and see how much people can actually get involved in it. So a pop-up is a really good way to start getting the message out there of what you're trying to do and start getting more volunteers in. Because if you try and do this with 5 to 10 people, you're going to get burnt out pretty quickly. It's a lot to take on from things that you just don't even think about before you start. So that's the easiest way to do it. Woking about to start doing it as well on our next door neighbours. So I would highly advise that if you know a space that might be usable, but you're a bit short on volunteer numbers, this can be a really good way to get people hooked. And if you can have a launch event and a couple of pop-ups event, then it can really get you off to a flying start. The next easiest way to go about this is setting up a legal entity, and there's three types so that you can actually get a lease. And there's 3 types for this. So a CIC is a community interest company. Now it takes about 48 hours to set up. It's pretty quick. It's the easiest way you can get a legal entity going. And this is important for if you need a bank account, for example, which can be really important for doing different things. You can get a bank account as a community interest company. And so that can really help you get off the ground. It can also help you fundraise if you're looking to do something on the longer term here. And fundraising, obviously, for this sort of thing is extremely important, be that either via community fundraising or through grant making. But that's the quickest way that you can do that. Then there's a charity, setting up as a charity. It took us about 4 months to set up as a charity. It's not a particularly easy process, but we were one of the first ones doing this sort of thing to set up. And I think it's getting quite a lot quicker now. So typically for the Charity Commission, there are standard things that you can tick and they'll approve it because they've done it so many times, they know what it's about. Obviously, when we started doing this, there weren't many things like this that existed, so it was a bit of an unknown. It seems that now a few of us have got charity status. The time is coming down and down, so I think it's typically about 2 months, but a couple of groups have done it quite a lot quicker than that recently. There's in every area, there is a voluntary action wherever you are. So for us, it's Voluntary Action Southwest Surrey. They can be immensely helpful in this. So their job is to advise local charities and community groups on how they can get set up, how they can do fundraising schemes, things like that. So I would highly recommend linking up with your local third sector support organisation. And one of the other benefits is that they actually hold centrally volunteering software platforms. So the one that we use is called Better Impact. That's just what Voluntary Action Southwest Surrey had. I think they vary in quality a bit, but that is basically, you can use that for free. You just ask Voluntary Action, can you set us up with the volunteering software? And then all your volunteers can go in and book their shifts. So you don't have to worry about complicated spreadsheets or figuring out how to do it. So it can be a great source of information. And then the third way is to set up as a not-for-profit company limited by guarantee. We didn't really look into that as a serious consideration. So I'm not going to talk to that much because I don't know a ton about it. But that is the other option. And some people have gone down that route. There's obviously a lot more, well, there's pluses and minuses to both. For having a charity, there's a lot more regulations you have to stick to, obviously. But it can, in the long term, have quite a lot of bonuses. So it's important that you weigh up what you're trying to do and what the best way to do that is. And then in terms of getting a space, there's a few different ways you can go about doing this as well. So what we've done, and what I think quite a few of these other groups that have set up have done, is get a meanwhile lease. So this is a short-term contract, which can be anywhere from a few months to a couple of years. Ours is a 2-year meanwhile lease, but with break clauses that kicked in after about 6 months. So what that means is that you can move in on a less complicated lease than a normal commercial lease, which would typically last 5 to 10 years. For the advantages, obviously, for the landlord of the building, is that they don't then have an empty space, which is quite unappealing to new tenants. It means you can go in, you can smarten it up. When we got into this place, it was a new look. So this Zero is 16,000 square foot. It's a bit of a beast, and it's over 3 floors. But it was quite a state. It had been empty for 3 years. Quite a few dead pigeons kicking around, which was not ideal. And actually, Prashant, who's coming later to chat about G-Care, we had him set up for Car Free Day, and we should have got the keys 3 months before, and we ended up having to put him on the doorstep of the day after we got the keys for it. So it wasn't the best sort of welcome for those guys coming to set up. But it took us about 8 weeks, 7 or 8 weeks to refurb the space. It was such a mess, and because we tried to do quite a lot with it. So it's quite important that when you look at doing something like this, you look at what the state the building is in, and if you're getting a 3 to 6 month lease and there's a couple of months work to do to make it sort of fit for human habitation, whether that's sort of worth it. Also, things to think about with this sort of thing is if you're inside a shopping centre, whether that shopping centre is going to close at 5 p.m. and you're not going to be able to get in there after that, because by far we have quite a lot of footfall come through the door on various days. It's quite unpredictable. Town centres, I don't think, are particularly predictable now after post-COVID. So some days it can be really quiet, some days it can be absolutely heaving in here, but we get a lot of interaction from events at night. So I would strongly say that you really need to weigh up the impact of not being able to get people into evening events when most people are free to come out and do stuff. And then one of the mechanisms of how you can get a meanwhile lease is through business rate relief. So charities are automatically exempt for a mandatory 80% discount on business rates right across the UK. And then depending on your local authority, you can potentially get an additional 20% discretionary discount on business rates. So that kind of depends on how closely on what basically you will be able to go on your council's website and see where they give that discretionary relief to. And for us, it was how you align with the council's vision. There's 9 points in their vision, and we arguably could have said that we align with all of them, but very strongly with 7. So that means that for us, we get 100% rate relief on the building, and when the building is sat there empty, the landlord is paying all of that, which can be, in our case here, it's tens of thousands of pounds for an empty building to just be sitting there, basically sort of rotting away, really. So the incentive for the landlord is it brings some vibrancy back into the building. It's more appealing to future future tenants, and there's someone fixing up a lot of the issues for free. The other alternative to look at is to use a council property. So depending on what it is, your council may be more reluctant to give you something. We did look at a council building here. They were going to be charging us more rent than we could actually afford, which was pretty much nothing. So it's something to look at. I think if you've got a good relationship with your council, or you've got councillors in your groups, then it's definitely something to explore. The other thing that you want to think about is whether you might have a supportive council now, but if it flipped during a council election, and you were in a council building, would the council start putting limitations on what you could say, or whether you criticise them about their response to the climate crisis? So those are really, again, sort of the decisions that come down to individual groups to make on what they think is best for them. And then at the bottom there, I put use a professional. There are companies that actually find meanwhile leases for different organisations setting up, and they've been doing this for a fair bit of time. So there is option that if you're really struggling, if you can't get hold of landlords through agent boards or what have you, that you can use that as an option. Slide, please. So I'm going to chat a little bit about Zero. We started this conversation early lockdown, May, June 2020. It took us, as I say, a few months. We got registered as a charity in December 2020. It took us another 9 months to get the keys. And that at the time was really frustrating. But actually what the bonus of that was that it gave us a lot of time to sort out a really solid foundation. So part of that was creating really good governance structures and policies. But the main benefit of it was giving us time to build a very strong network. So we did a lot of one-to-one sessions with people to talk about how they might want to get involved and bring their wider groups in, about how we could collaborate better. And so that really laid a solid base so that when we did get keys, we really hit the ground running, and we had a lot of people chipping in to refurb it. We had a lot of people bringing exhibits and displays in. So sometimes it is worth taking your time. It's worth sticking to the plan that you've devised of how you can do this, and not thinking, oh, there's a building, we might not get offered another one. Because you, as I say, if you rush into something, you may find that you can't do events in the evening, or you might just end up with more problems than it's worth. So make sure it's right for you. As I say, we spent about 7 or 8 weeks refurbing it. And then we got the keys in September, had our official launch in November. So as I say, been open about 6 months now. And since we opened on November the 20th, we've got 140 voting members. So that isn't a mailing list, that's actual members who are part of the organisation. So we wrote our constitution, our charity constitution, to have voting members so that the decisions for the charity didn't just come down to a group of trustees. We felt this was much more inclusive and acting more, so the trustees could act more like a conduit, really like a lot of government and local authorities should be working for constituents. So we wanted to have these voting members. So we have 140 voting members. Our mailing list is much, much bigger than that. We've got over 120 accepted volunteers, a core of probably about half that number who are in quite frequently or doing stuff behind the scenes. We launched, when we got the keys and before we opened, we launched a crowdfunder. We set a 10 grand target for that. We got match funding from someone for another 10 grand. And as a charity, we got gift days. So we hit nearly 25 grand on that target, hit it within 3 weeks. So we are absolutely blown away by that. Couldn't believe how quickly we hit it. And then we shut it down after that because we had enough cash to get the project off the ground. And at the end of April, we just served our 5,000th customer. So we're getting a lot of people through the door, and that's not just people coming in through the doors, that's people actually either using the vegan cafe or the refill shop, which we've got in here. So it shows the amount of extra interaction that you might get compared to obviously just having a weekly meeting for groups, you know, once a week, all happening in silos or what have you. So that's in a nutshell sort of our background. Could I have the next slide, please, Dan? Then I just got some pictures here to show you some of the things that we're doing. So that's Zero on the bottom left. That was the old new look. As I say, it's sort of smartened up a fair bit since we got it. Bottom right is our refill shop, which is right opposite me now. We sell about 100 different products in there, from sort of staple foodstuffs to vegan pick and mix to grains and spices, cleaning, household cleaning products, personal cleaning products. And it's pretty popular. That green heart at the top was part of the Climate Coalition's Show the Love campaign. We got, between us and the Friary, which is the shopping centre next to us, we got 3,000 messages for climate action written on green hearts across February, which was pretty great. For a town of 100,000 people, we thought that was pretty impressive, really. And then there's Alan on the right there with a community fridge sign. I'll talk about the reporting of that a bit later, but obviously, again, this is a great way to put solutions first and then talk about the underlying issues with it. Slide, please, Dan. So what we've got now, this is a bit of a summary of what we've got. This is not everything for by any means, but alongside the community fridge, we've got air quality monitoring stations. The guys are here at the moment behind me calibrating our external air quality, which is Prashant's department. We'll chat in a bit. We do citizen science water testing here to try and clean up part of the river into a certified swimming spot. We've got a TerraCycle station. So obviously, recycling is one of those frustrating things where lots of people were bought into it, and we know it's not going to solve problems, but it is a great hook to get people involved. It was, for a while, it was the third most popular way people found our website, and TerraCycle is all the things that can't be recycled on the curbside. So it's a bit of a circular economy thing. A lot of things get turned into playground tiles or plastic benches. So although recycling itself is not, you know, a proper solution to anything, and we need to actually look at reducing the manufacturing of these packaging products, it's a great way to start getting people involved. It brings more people through the door. It gets more people on a ladder to taking more action, and it can save. I think we've got about 150 kilos saved up from that so far. When I worked out what 80 kilos was, it turned out to be something like 46,000 crisp packets, which we were like, oh wow, that's pretty great. That we've managed to save that all from going, you know, in the sea or landfill. And then I looked it up, and that's actually 6 seconds worth of production at Walker's factory, which is pretty horrifying and was a bit deflating after all that. But again, you know, the upside to that is that it's messaging to say to people, look, this isn't a solution in itself, and here's the reason why. Because all of this over the last 2 months is actually only 6 seconds worth of production, and then we sell zero waste crisps in our shop, so we can then point them over to that and say, look, there are other ways to do some of this, and you can also, you know, push Walkers or whoever to start using either compostable packaging or come up with a better solution, basically. So although some of these things may seem, not the ideal solution, it can help build a bit of momentum around, right, well, how are we going to start pushing for a better answer to this? We got vertical farming towers in here, which were funded by Transition Network. That was the first bit of funding we got. And then event-wise, we try and hold as diverse a range of events as possible, because obviously the key point of this sort of project is reaching out beyond the converted. It's trying to not preach to the choir anymore and to bring everybody in to form a proper community-led climate action plan. And you're never going to do that unless you get a proper representation of all the demographics in your area. So events is one hopefully quite good way to do this. And we are finding that when we first started, we would have an event and there might be 30 people on the invite list. And I would know pretty much everybody on the invite list. And now we can do stuff when I don't know a single person there, which is excellent. I think that's obviously a pretty unquantifiable way of reporting things, but a lot of the time that's quite a tricky part for reporting, which we'll chat about in a bit. So you can definitely see the reach that we're getting expanding. So last week we hosted an event online with Ed Carr, who was one of the lead authors on the latest IPCC adaptation report. We do things like climate quizzes. We don't have a license here, so we do bring your own. So that's always pretty good fun. We do open mic nights. We do energy advice sessions for people struggling with fuel poverty, and then we do a series of energy efficiency talks as well. And then all around the building, we've got lots of different displays. So next to me here is the prototype of the jump wall that we started in association with the charity The Jump. It's based on really solid research out of C40 and Arup, and we built local solutions into that. So for all of the 6 areas where people can best reduce their own impact, we built in local solutions to easily point people in those directions. Currently, we've got the Big Plastic Count campaign running, so we've got a load of information behind me on that. They built a big wave out of old plastic. We've got counters for people to vote on the best way to reduce single-use plastic. And then down there, we've got a load of home energy retrofitting advice, like PV panels, insulation, stuff that we got from local companies, all put up on the wall. Slide, please. And there's some just positive news on the reporting. So as I say, our crowdfunder was a great bit of news. Most recent thing we got was a couple of grand for our citizen science water testing, which we've got some branded water test kits on it, which we give out to the community. We teach them how to do water testing, and then they can come and borrow the kits. And we're building up a picture of what the River Wey looks like for that. We just got £10,000 from National Lottery, which was great to help further kit out some of our displays. And the guys behind me doing the air monitoring, we got some funding from them to do real-time air monitoring. Guildford actually, surprisingly, is in the 97th percentile of air pollution. We have occasionally, but on parts of the A3, the worst air pollution in England. So again, this is the sort of galvanizing local issue that can bring people who might not otherwise be engaged in climate stuff really into the mix with, health is one of those things that resonates right across demographics and political spectrum. The framing of health around some of this issue is really important, I think. And then our community fridge that launched at the end of January or the start of February, and we've saved about 2 tons of food on that so far. We have a kilo sale once a month with secondhand vintage clothing, because obviously fast fashion is a big contributor to emissions. They've sold about 9,000 items on that so far. So that is millions of litres of water and a lot of CO2 saved. And on waste, we've done 2 litter picks this month, and between that and TerraCycle, we've got about 250 kilos of waste from it. And then looking ahead, we are about to launch a sustainable business network in partnership with the University of Surrey. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but they'll be funding that. We're currently having a feasibility study being done to launch a community energy company. We have started looking at how we can break this down into sort of hyper-local action. So we've had a couple of parish climate action meetings now. Guildford is basically a town centre surrounded by villages and smaller areas. And so the challenges in different parts of the borough are quite different. And for the rural area, I live out at sort of semi-countryside. Transport is the main issue there. And 46% of Surrey's emissions come from transport. We've got about 1.5 to 2 times the amount of traffic on the roads, and more than I think maybe double the amount of cars per household as the national average. So it's not great. And so we're looking at the ways that we can address the issues, not just as Guildford locally, but actually in a much more local focus, so that we can actually get people buying into that hyper-local community side of things. Slide, please. Right, have we got Amanda here? I'm going to pass over to Amanda now. So this is, if Amanda's here, hopefully she is going to share with us a little bit about the state of the high street at the moment and how a project like this, a community-led project, can improve or what it can bring to your area. We've actually got 2 community-led spaces in Guildford now. So actually the place I mentioned before where the council showed us, one of the local music venues took it over and it's now a open collaborative art space. So they're doing really well. So we've got the climate focused one and an art focused one, and we're quite pally with them. So we're looking to team up with stuff. So if Amanda's here, I will pass over to her. Is she here, Rich?
I am here.
Hi, Amanda. How are you doing?
I can't get my camera to work though. So I don't know whether that's a good or a bad thing. Probably a good thing for everybody.
We can see you.
Thanks for that. Thank you, Ben. Really nice to be here. Really interesting listening to the last few minutes, well, the last few minutes of Ben speaking about what you're up to. Thanks for having me. As Ben has mentioned, I run the Business Improvement District in Guildford Town Centre and have done for nearly 10 years now. And so we're very interested to see how towns, particularly ours, are transforming post-pandemic, because we have seen a massive shift in people's values because of the time taken to ourselves during a pandemic where we were all doing something completely different to that which we were doing before. So just to give you a bit of an overview of, I'm using Guildford as our base because that's what I know best. But I bet we're not that dissimilar to the areas that you guys are in yourselves. So we've seen an increase in empty units, obviously, particularly over the last 2 years. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think we all know that certain parts of retail were in decline 2.5 years ago anyway. What the pandemic did was accelerate that decline to a degree. So you've seen some of your big guys disappeared, your Debenhams, your New Looks from ours particularly, luckily for Ben. So you saw some of the high street staples just not there anymore, and they're not. But what that has done is attract new business and new local business and projects like Zero, to add certain different dynamics to our town centres. And that's because people's values have changed. So whereas Guildford used to be the #1 day out for retail, so if you wanted a shopping day out, Guildford was the place to come in this particular region. That's no longer the case. And actually that's no longer a bad thing because people's values have changed quite considerably. We care more about time. We care more about family and friends and spending time with them. Leisure time is so important to us now. We care about space around us. We appreciate space around us. And we care about, generally people now care more about their environment than they ever did before because we have more time to think about it. And that means immediate environment. So what the town centre would look like to them and how we can help that by greening it. But also the environment generally. And I think people have shifted their values, and a town centre that does not move with these values will not survive. It has to transform with a community at heart. And we've noticed that our footfall, yes, okay, it's tracking below 2019 levels at the moment, but not that far below. It is, as Ben said, slightly erratic. It can be brilliant one day and then the next day for no reason at all it's really quite quiet, but generally speaking we're not that far off 2019 levels, but the car parks are not full, whereas Guildford, and don't get me wrong, and I'm not decrying what Ben's just said about us being the most polluted area in the southeast, well, actually in the country, because we are too many cars on our roads, too many people in a small county, etc., etc. That still stands. However, people are not travelling up to town so much, up to London so much. They're not commuting as much because there's more work from home. But the footfall is high, where the car park usage is lower. that says to me that's the locals using their town centre a lot more than they ever did before. And that is really noticeable when you walk through Guildford town centre every week. You will see that it is residents using their town centre a lot more than they ever did. And I think the town has to transform with that community at its heart, because I don't think we will succeed the transformation and the evolution and the sustainability of our town centre without thinking about what the community wants. Now, because of this change of values and because of the way that we now as human beings see the world, our town centre has already started to evolve in this way. Tiny footsteps, I would say, at the moment, but since the start of the first lockdown, since the start of the pandemic, there has not been one fast fashion store open up in Guildford. Now that is unheard of for us. That be it quite high market or mid market, we would attract a lot of big names, big brand names to this town centre. Not one, but what we have seen is things like, well, Ben at Zero, obviously, which is great, but also other coffee shops, hospitality, restaurants. It's all about hospitality and leisure for people at the moment. And actually the one clothes boutique that has opened up in the last year is actually second-hand dress agency. So it's not new clothing, it's again reusing, recycling. So I'm finding this fascinating. I mean, you watch, we'll have, I don't know, new look back tomorrow just to make a liar of me. But at the moment, this is where it stands. And this, I think, is brilliant, because most of these businesses that are opening up are local, a lot of them are independent, and a lot of them care about their immediate trading environment. And a lot of them care if it's not clean and tidy, safe and welcoming, but also green, with space, and with places for people to meet, and with places for people to collaborate. And collaboration's been the biggest thing that I've seen change over the last few months as well in town centre, because businesses are talking to each other. They do want to support each other. They want to bounce off each other's offerings to support themselves. But they're coming together more, particularly using Zero as a base. It's fantastic because it provides this wonderful forum for businesses to sit and talk and find out more about what they can do. Now, I know it's difficult for us as businesses, particularly small businesses. We all want to do something. We're all fired up to do something, but sitting here thinking, where do I start? What do I do? Where is the best place for a small retailer to start? So Ben and the Zero team starting up the network, the business network, or the sustainability network, sorry, which I believe we're meeting relatively soon, is a great step forward, because what that does is show support to a community that before now perhaps probably hasn't had the guidance, and we need our hand holding a little bit. So I think town centres now need to provide that sort of support, that community, that collaboration, and one, to change and transform to the way that people's values have changed and transformed, but also to support each other and grow and evolve and succeed. I don't think there's a great deal more on that I can say, unless anybody's got any immediate questions, but thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. I tell you what is another benefit of this, which has not happened before, but Wagamama's have just brought us a load of free food. So I now have vegan ribs and bang bang cauliflower, which would not have happened had we not done this, giving back to the community. Cool, thanks very much, Amanda. We chatted about some of the benefits of starting up this sort of project, but I want to chat a little bit about the wider impact some of this can have on sort of galvanizing climate action locally. And I've put a few little pictures in here to demonstrate some of that. So the map that you can see in the bottom left with all the blue dots on it, that is mutual aid networks that sprang up during COVID. And I think these are a really good, we might times think, oh, no one in my area cares about, you know, what they're doing or each other, but actually, you know, these sort of things did show us that when faced with a crisis, people really do start pulling together. And it's really tricky with the climate crisis because most of us view it either really far off in the distance or put these defensive mechanisms up to protect us from the horror of it all. But when you start bringing it down quite locally, people do care more, as I said earlier, about their neighbours, the area they live in. And so it becomes a bit easier to reach across demographics and political divides when you're chatting about building some of this action together. And from that, I think part of the reason for that is that it's easier to build a sort of sense of local identity. So now as a country, we don't really have much of a national identity. We've got sort of culture wars being driven by vested interests or what have you, but still at local levels we do have community identities, and I think that's a really important thing to tap into here. You can see bottom right there was what I was trying to use to demonstrate that. That's Stokes Croft in Bristol. It's really cool if you've ever been there. There's street art everywhere, and they're really proud of all that. It's like a good community spirit around protecting like that. There's a couple of Banksies down there. And from that, obviously, the strongest way to start getting climate action happening is peer-to-peer messaging. We've evolved to, you know, for our own safety to fit in with what's going on. If you're someone that's not part of the crowd when we've traditionally been evolving, then you're probably going to get eaten by something. So we all want to sort of fit in. It's just ingrained into us, and it doesn't mean you can't be an individual, but it's like a defense mechanism. And so contagious behavior can be a really big part of this, and that's what the panels on the roof are showing there. Not all of those were built. You can see in the background they haven't all got solar panels on, but you can often be on a train and you'll go past an area and you might see all the front gardens are lovely because everyone's taking pride in it, or you might see a whole little block of houses where one neighbour's got PV panels on and it's spread, people going, oh, I wouldn't mind a bit of cheap electricity. So these contagious behaviours can be a really important way to drive action locally, and getting this interaction through a space like this can really help that. And then top left is Balcombe, which is a village which got a community heat project going, and the whole village is run off renewable heating now. And so I think one really good thing about this, and this is what I was sort of touching on with what we've been doing with parishes, is that you can try, and this applies to us doing different things in different climate hubs across the UK. We can all try out different things in different locations, and when we find models that work, it means it's a lot easier to actually start moving rapidly towards these solutions if we can, you know, share that knowledge, rather than us all just trying one thing right across the country and failing and being back to square one. So obviously the sort of perfect outcome of this, the perfect recipe for getting this together, is something that sort of brings all of those in. So finding a genuine issue in a community and finding uniting messaging around that, be that on, you know, energy independence or health, and then getting that peer-to-peer interaction support to drive some of this forward with an end result that the benefits go directly to the community. So obviously, slide please. Obviously, this all depends quite a bit on bringing enough people in together and finding the stakeholders to team up with, because again, this is, you know, it involves quite a lot of effort from lots of different people. So I am going to pass over to Professor Prashant Kumar in a second. I basically want to talk about stakeholders, but I've been rambling a bit, so I'm running out of time. So I want to bring Prashant in to talk about what we've been doing with the Global Centre for Air Research up at University of Surrey, and he can talk to some of the collaboration we've been doing, and then I'm going to chat a little bit about that, and then the Sustainable Business Network that Amanda touched on, and then we'll go to a bit of Q&A. So Prashant, over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. And I understand that I have got 5 minutes or 4 minutes. So first of all, you know, it's a pleasure to be here. So my name is Prashant Kumar. So I'm professor and chair in air quality and health. I'm also the founding director of center, which we call it GCARE, which is the Global Center for Clean Air Research. So I think Zero has been kind of a, I should say, a blessing actually for us as researchers. So I guess one of the key things we want is, you know, a lot of our research, what we produce, how it could really be implemented, could be used by public. So in order to do that, you need actually the space where you can interact with the people, but also the willingness of the people actually who can really, you know, take those things forward. So for example, we started working, you know, with Zero through our, you know, some of the initiatives where we wanted to display some of the information which we have created for the public. So for example, we have a tool called HashDate, where you can design your own hedges. There is a initiative called Heat Cool, where we have been going to the schools and educating children about the climate change impacts. And we could get actually a lot of these contacts because these people were coming to the Zero, and Ben has been very proactive in linking up and facilitating a lot of these things and supporting actually in whatever way they can do through Zero. So I remember yesterday, I think day before yesterday, I think I was at the Pint of Science in Zero. This was almost the first time I was talking in that kind of environment, and that was really fantastic to talk about the air quality research and how the people can benefit from it. So when the Zero was kind of launched, so I've been in discussion with Ben actually since he was finalizing the idea. We had a discussion about whether we can have some sort of the place where we can demonstrate some of those the resources, so which we have done. So this is, if you go and visit Zero, you can see a place where you can see quite a lot of stuff. You can play quiz, you can understand how your air pollution exposure would be. But then that time, I think we just had a vague idea. We said, what if we, let's say, have a real-time display system of the air pollution so that people can understand what's going on in the town center. So we both worked together, and then we bid for a funding from the University of Surrey, which we managed to win. So at the moment, we have been working on having that system live, and there has been a lot of interest among the communities, among the people. They need to understand actually what's going on in the town center, and these are the ideas which are very transferable to other places. Like you have been talking about, refurbishing or regenerating, some of these the spaces which are not used in other towns. So that could really be, something can be easily adopted. The what recently we have done is, so there is another aspect of it. So for example, I managed to win a network grant, which is one of the 3 grants given by the UKRI. It's 1.2 million, which we call it Reclaim Network. So this is basically looking into how to make the city sustainable. So how to bring the green, blue, and the grey infrastructure, into the cities. So again, the Zero has been, the kind of the partners in the grant, and the band was kindly, providing inputs to the welcome event, and people really appreciated actually the the community perspective and how you could benefit actually from these kind of spaces. And I think we have quite a long way to go there. So I'm seeing a lot of work being cross-fed from his perspective, because he understands or the people who are working with the community group, they understand better actually what are the needs at the grassroots level. And as a researcher, you could generate the evidence, and that basically allows to make an impact. Because when you go to the councillors or the politicians or the people who are taking the decision, they say, look, you want this. The first thing they will ask you, what's the benefit? What's the cost-benefit analysis? Do you have the evidence that it really does what you are talking about? So I think this is where we come as researchers, and how do we generate those, the evidences? This is where the, the spaces like Zero comes in to facilitate that, the kind of research and be part of that research and co-design some of the projects that could really, address some challenging issues which our communities are facing. I think I'm going to stop here, Ben, but I'm not sure whether I managed to cover all the points. But hopefully it makes the point that I think we should really be looking very positively in terms of having more of these kind of spaces and possibly, making use of the model, which has been very successful so far. Thank you.
Cheers, Prashant. Yeah, sorry for having to rush you through that. My fault entirely for rambling at the start. Can we have the slides back, please, Dan? So I'm going to skip through this and come back to this in the questions because it lines up. So can I have the next slide, please? That's backwards. Next one. Yeah, so just want to quickly touch on this. I'm going to pop a link in the chat here, which will do this in a much better detail than I can in 2 minutes. But we've got a long blog which has written out how you can get started, or at least how we did it. Again, it's going to be different for everybody. But the absolute 3 key parts to getting something this like off the ground are build the network. I can't emphasize this enough. Bring as many people in as you can from all different sectors and perspectives, from social and environmental groups as well as elsewhere. Determine your objectives, get a plan, at least a framework, and stick to it. You can round out it with community input, but at least have that basic framework laid out and make sure that you're making the decisions based on that, and become a legal entity, because it really can help you. It's great getting a pop-up going to bring volunteers in, but as soon as you can get to that point, even if you're setting that up alongside running a pop-up, it massively helps with financing, with collaboration. Obviously, being a charity or what have you can really lend a lot of legitimacy to it and help you to start getting more partners. So I've posted a link to the blog that's in there, creating a community climate hub, in the chat for you guys to read. I think it's probably best if we go to Q&A now, because we've only got 15 minutes left. So I'd like to hear people's thoughts and interact a little bit, because you probably listen to me chatting up now.
Fantastic. So just to say, the way we're going to do this, if you formulate your question as succinctly as you can in the chat, then we're capturing that into a document so Ben can kind of navigate his way through it. The reason is we'd love you to also react in the chat and share what you want to share and so on. And sometimes question gets lost because it just scrolls. So if you pop your question in the chat, there has been a few from earlier in the talk, Ben, and perhaps if you pop into your document there, you can see them on the document.
And I can answer one visually right now. That is vertical farming, if you can see that. So it is lots of plants growing in a tower. That is what Transition Network funded 2 of those for, and we run that as a sort of a tool to engage people on food security, because food obviously is another one of those uniting messaging ways to chat to people. Food, we all rely on food to survive. We import 40% of our food. So there's lots of different types of urban agriculture, or hydroponics, aquaponics, aeroponics. We use that, which is like a shower head going over the roots, no soil at all. And then another question I saw, what's an adaptation talk? So adaptation, obviously there's climate mitigation, which is trying to keep us below 1.5 degrees warming. And then adaptation is looking at, well, what happens if we don't manage to stay within that? How are we going to cope with a changing planet? And so this is a big part of why we started this place. There's evidence to show we've passed, maybe 9 tipping points already. And so it's no longer enough to just think about mitigation. We need to start thinking about how we would cope with a worst case scenario. And that's not a very nice subject to talk about a lot of the time, which is why a lot of these things like clothes sharing, library of things can be a good way to open some of these conversations. Okay, so this is one of the questions I want to answer, because it's come up a couple of times. So Rosa was asking, were there any existing groups doing related activities in the area before you set up Zero? How did you draw them in and not tread on their toes? So it's a great question, and I'm going to sort of tie that in with what I would have said a couple of slides ago. There was quite a bit going on. I really think that one of the galvanizing things in what's happened here locally was the global strike, September 2019. So we've got some really great youth strikers here. In our first batch of trustees, our trustees were aged between 17 and 76. So we had a pretty wide age range, and the youth strikers were doing the youth strikes every month. And when the global strike was coming around, a lot of us sort of got together and like, how can we get as many people as possible out for this? And to everybody's amazement, we had about 1,000 people out on the high street, which is a lot for the middle of Surrey. And I think that was, no one's really talked about this, but I think it really sort of was a good demonstration of what happens when we come together. So to not tread on toes, but bear in mind it was lockdown. So I wouldn't say I was twiddling my thumbs. I was digging soakaways and ponds for a lot of the time, but I did have more free time than usual. So I spent quite a lot of time speaking to people one-on-one and discussing what the plan was, especially people that I knew were pretty active in other groups, social or environmental groups. We've had it was a transition town, I don't know, 15 years ago maybe, and it sort of morphed with a few others and became Guildford Environmental Forum, and they're sort of, I suppose, the respectable face of environmentalism around here. And they're sort of a more slightly older contingent, but they've been really great, really supportive. They gave us some funding around the same time as Transition to just help get us off the ground. So a lot of one-on-one interaction and a lot of feeding in from the community, say, well, what should this space look like for you? And really framing it as, we want to support what you're doing. So within here, like all around the walls, are displays by all of these groups. So it was never a case of, look, we want to be an umbrella group and we're going to tell you what to do. We've described ourselves as the glue that's trying to bring together a lot of what is happening in silos. And someone actually described this much better on the Blizzard on Wednesday night as trying to weave stuff together is better an analogy than my glue one, unfortunately. I'm stealing that now. So we really framed this as how can we best support you, and that can be free events. So we let people do events and workshops in here for free if they align with our charitable objectives. So it means where a lot of community groups were paying, you know, £40 a week or what have you, they can now use this space for free if they align with our charitable objectives. So that's a good way. People hold AGMs here, they hold volunteer meetings here. So we never really had that, and we built an alliance of maybe 30 to 40 different groups. The thing I was going to talk about on the slide before, which is relevant to Prashant and why I invited him along, is obviously a great partner can be academia near you. So the funding really relies, like high funding, NEIC funding, a lot of it relies on exactly what Prashant was saying, in making that academia useful to the wider community. And so if you can act as a knowledge exchange platform for local institutions, that's going to help them continue to get funding. So if you've got a university near you, it can be an absolute blessing. And the thing that I skipped before about the Sustainable Business Network, in August, we're about to launch that with hopefully a full-time employee, pushing that forward with the goals of cutting emissions. Our borough is 25 to 30% emissions from business. So it's a crucial part to bring in, and probably one of the harder parts to engage, because they're always going to be looking at bottom line. So we're trying to reframe this as well. Actually, what you need to be thinking about is the long-term resilience of your business as well, because, you know, there's no point in focusing on short-term bottom line if your business won't exist in a few years. And so we're trying to reframe that away from growth into longevity. And so a university can be a really key part of how quickly this gets off the ground. This didn't all just happen when we opened Zero. This was like several years of lots of people networking between different groups, and this helped bring it together. So it's one of those things where maybe taking a bit longer can help. I know we all feel pretty rushed given the scale of the crisis that we face, but sometimes sitting down and building those relationships one-on-one with key people can really help galvanize. And someone the other day was talking about, on the Blizzard, was talking about the people they had in their sort of core group of 5 or 6 people, and it's some amazingly impressive people. So if you can find the right people, then it can act as a massive catalyst to bringing more people in. What other questions we got?
Can I suggest a question that's popped in there, Ben, perhaps, because I know you're putting your energy into the camera there. So it's a question about volunteers, and I want to add something to it as well. The question is, in what way have your volunteers and users surprised you, either positively or with respect to challenges that have come up? And I'd love to add something to that, seeing your answer about volunteering in the chat, which is about, do you find that there are any barriers, given a volunteer model, to greater engagement in Zero and Guildford?
So on the barriers front, we could definitely do with paid staff. Don't get me wrong; it would make things quite a lot easier. I actually quite like being able to say to people, look, none of us are paid. We all do this because this is the scale of the situation, and this is why we all care about giving up our free time to do this. So I think there's really good messaging on that. But it would be way more helpful, obviously, if we had someone paid. I think obviously barriers, we are a town centre, and we do have North Guildford is certainly some lower income areas. So we definitely still haven't properly engaged those parts of the community, and we're trying to get some funding to have a lot of this made mobile and to be able to go out into those parts of the community. Funding's not come through yet, but we're really trying to not rely on people just coming to us. That's been one of our plans right from the start. So that is one of the things I would say would be a main barrier. We do pay people's expenses for travel if they travel by public transport. What was the first part of the question again?
Yeah, it's from Suzanne. I'm just going to read it because of time, Suzanne. Apologies. In what way have your volunteers and users surprised you, either positively or perhaps with surprising challenges?
Yeah, so I think we haven't had many challenges, I don't think. One of the best examples is we sort of created this place to facilitate the community leading on stuff. And we had originally teamed up with a charity called Mid-Surrey Community Fridges, who have got 8 fridges across Surrey to get our fridge off the ground. And lockdown impacted them not amazingly, understandably. So they pulled out. And one of our volunteers said, I really, really love this idea. So if it's fine with you guys, I'm going to run with it. So she took it on. We'd already applied for funding, which got rejected, but we got it in a second phase. So we did the fundraising part, but she basically got it from nothing to a functioning community fridge with 5 different supermarkets giving us food. So that was a great surprise that came out of all of that. The wealth of knowledge and experience of some of the people getting involved is amazing. Like sometimes people come and you're like, wow, like you would be extremely invaluable, but just take all of this work, please, and go away and do it. So I think it's one of those things of building momentum. The more you can reach out and the more you really encourage people to do this sort of peer-to-peer interaction, the more people you start chatting to. But it's not, you don't just open the doors and people start flooding to you and be like, oh, I want to get involved with this. It does take a lot of hard work and networking, but I would say, as I say, that really underpins everything, is how many people you can get out and chat to. But there's lots of volunteers here, so I'm not going to say that there's been any challenges, because they might overhead. But no, typically they're amazing people, really.
Fantastic, thank you. Maybe we're going to have got time for just one more question, and I'm going to come to this one about a connection with a session we ran last night. So the question is, just if you could answer as succinctly as possible, and I'm going to look after the other questions in a moment, so don't worry if your question hasn't been answered. So did I read somewhere that you worked with Donut Economic Action Lab? If so, how has this informed your work? And this is a question from Hayley.
Yeah, so we actually, during Great Big Green Week last year, had the first ever in-person Donut Economic Action Lab workshop, because they'd obviously been working through lockdown. I love the concept. We're fortunate enough to have CUSP, the Centre for Understanding Sustainable Prosperity, on campus here. So that's, if you know Tim Jackson, Prosperity Without Growth, he's based up there. And again, this goes back to stuff that I'd been doing in trying to build a bit of a network locally before we actually opened this space, which was a good grounding for it. So the whole sort of donut concept really underpins a lot of what we do in here. When people hear the word economics, they shy away from it. And I think that's still quite a difficult barrier to get over. But if you can get people to the workshop, anyone who attended last night will have chatted to Rob. He is like a brilliant facilitator. It's probably the most popular event we've had so far. And I'm currently building a large 2.5 meter wide wall, which is based on the 4 lenses workshop. So it unravels the donut into a strip, basically. And the great thing about this for me comes back to messaging, right? So some of these words, even words, if you look at the climate outreach stuff, which I highly recommend, I'm trying to be succinct here, by the way, Rich, but even words like green, eco, defend, save can have a sort of subconscious impact on people where they're like, oh, it's lefty talk, I'm not getting involved with this, right? And there's nothing more that I don't think than the words justice, climate justice, social justice. People who don't identify with people who care about that immediately block out to it, right? And so the great thing for me about donut economics, and especially this 4 lenses, is it pitches what your responsibilities are locally and then what your place in the world is. So it's one of those ways of opening a conversation, because people do care about what their impact is on a wider scale, but their brains are just wired to be like, I don't identify with that. So it really helps open this conversation without using some of those trigger words. And I know that sometimes feels wrong to us, and we want to really, lots of us want to really hammer home what the message we care about is. But for me, the wider point is you've got to bring people into that conversation to get anywhere at all, basically. And we're never going to tackle the climate crisis in little sections. We're just never, ever going to get there by being divided into 2 or 3 or 4 parts of society. So finding those ways to bring us together around, shared values and what our identity is and how we can start tackling some of these issues locally, but our responsibility globally. For us, the first ever water mill was just down the road. So we've got a huge responsibility in terms of industrial revolution. That is key to me, and donut economics can be a great way to do that.
That's amazing. And it's such a thread through your talk is about how do we reach beyond what I'm starting to call the current actionist. The usual suspects feels a bit irksome somehow to me. So like the current people who have like bought in and absolutely, giving their time and expertise to this great transition. But how do we get beyond that? Because goodness knows, everyone on this call, everyone coming to this summit, we have 1,000 people logged into Eventbrite to access the sessions, all pioneers still, absolutely the tiniest of less than 1% of people. So that's such a big thread through your talk, Ben, is about how do you relate this stuff to a wider and wider and wider group of people. Unfortunately, though, we're out of time for this session, folks. such a rich amount of information. I guess Zero Guildford and places like it as well are sort of holding a lot of pieces of the puzzle, a lot of parts of the story. So inevitably it's quite rich, perhaps a bit overwhelming to hear in one of these sessions. But thanks so much. We do it sometimes by like this. We'll have a chance off mic, but if we can say a big thank you to Ben, to Professor Prashant Kumar, and to, help me out, Amanda Masters from the bid there in Guildford. Big thank you to them. Thanks so much, folks. Brilliant. Really, really fantastic.